So let's begin where Mark began. The place. The place. Don't miss this verse. I know there's a rush to get to his crucifixion, don't miss what this verse says. And they brought him to the place Golgotha, which is translated place of a skull. Golgotha was called the place of the skull, probably due to the fact that it resembled a skull, not because skulls were collected there. Some preachers have wrongly articulated that this is where skulls were collected. That's not the case. Such an idea would have been completely abhorrent to the Jews, and they would not have allowed it in their nation, let alone outside of Jerusalem, their holy city. In some of your Bibles, in the King James, if you're using it, in Luke chapter 23, verse 33, it calls the place Calvary. Calvary. That term is derived from the Latin term calvarus, which means the skull, the skull. So Calvary is just another name for Golgotha, which means the skull. This place would have been north of Jerusalem on the outskirts of the city. Now, our tendency is to miss the significance of that. Jesus died outside the gate. In Hebrews chapter 13, the author of Hebrews reminds his recipients that the Christian altar is very different from the altar associated with the Old Covenant. And after he reminds them of that, he then reminds them of this truth. Listen to Hebrews 13, verse 11 and 12. Please don't miss this morning. He writes, "For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy place by the high priest as an offering for sin are burned outside the camp. Therefore, listen, therefore Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people through his own blood, suffered outside the gate." Now watch this. Watch what the author of Hebrews does. Verse 13. "Hence, let us, you and me, go out to him, outside the camp, bearing his reproach. For there we do not have a lasting city, but we are seeking the city which is to come." Don't miss this, church. Do you see that Jesus' suffering outside of Jerusalem had a typological significance that only believers understand? There was stigma outside the gate. And the author of Hebrews says we as Christians are to join Christ outside the gate, and we are to embrace the same stigma that Jesus embraced. Oh, you're not following me this morning. We are to identify with Christ as outsiders. This is what I attempted to communicate to you last week at the conclusion of my sermon. When Jesus spoke of taking up your cross, he was not referring to the difficulties you might face or the suffering you might have to experience in this life. We want to say, this is my cross to bear. No! Your difficulties and sufferings, those aren't your cross to bear. That's not what Christ meant by your cross. Christ was pointing specifically to what the author of Hebrews is pointing to. The follower of Christ must be willing to embrace the stigma of the cross. He must take up his own cross. That is, the shame that bearing a cross would bring, the shame of being a Christian. The true disciple I'm talking about the fake disciple. The true disciple willingly embraces the shame of being a Christian. We go outside the city with Jesus. We bear our cross as Jesus did. We bear the stigma that was his. That stigma becomes ours. Identifying with and obeying Christ becomes more important to us than being accepted by others, than having what we want in this life. You see, unless you're willing to die to yourself, you can't be a disciple of Christ. Take up your cross. That's Christianity. Some of us are unwilling to embrace the stigma, the wagging of people's heads. Oh, she a Christian. Don't bother asking her to go. She a Christian. We're unwilling to embrace the embarrassment of being a Christian. We hear somebody begin talking about religion, and we find the exit door. Because we don't want to have to make a stand for Jesus. Not in front of these people. Not in front of my coworkers. Not in front of my classmates. I don't want to have the stigma of being a Christian put on me. The author of Hebrews says real Christians join Jesus outside the gate. That's where the stigma is. They take their own cross and they join Jesus and they are crucified with him. Is that your Christianity? Stigma Christianity? Willing to be identified with Jesus, willing to do it Jesus' way, irregardless of what people are going to say about me, talk about me, look at me sideways. I don't care. I am embracing what it means to be a stigma, a cross Christian. That's not popular in the church today. We want comfortable Christianity. We've got too much to lose. We got too much to lose. We finally got our life going in the right direction. We finally got things going the way they should be. We've got too much to lose.